welcome back to Beyond the Curve, providing strategic insights on international business and international law. I'm Jeffrey O'Brien, alongside my co-host, Dr. Adriana Sanford. Also joining us, Hugh Wolf, and of course, Dr. Denis Leclerc. Good morning, everybody. Let's talk about global negotiations. Culture is largely invisible. It's not just a set of surface behaviors, rather it's deeply embedded in all of us. Values, attitudes, assumptions, they're all shared amongst people in different groups. Methods of decision making can differ tremendously amongst countries. Could you give us an example of cross-cultural misunderstandings that could occur in a negotiation depending on culture?
How long do we have?
We've got plenty of time.
Okay, good.
Unless there's been some sort of cultural misunderstanding.
Okay, because actually we could spend like hours talking about this topic. Actually, just top of my head, maybe the notion of what a contract is, even the pure concept of what a contract is, if it's a binding agreement or if it's just the startup of a relationship between two parties, is, to me, culturally, that's already right there. And then you have, of course, the implementation of the time of the contract. In the U.S., we're very used to have, like, if we tell you a deadline is the 15th, it's the 15th.
Right.
And you go to other countries and they look at you and it's like, well, 17th, 18th, 20th, 31st, it's still in the same month. So, what's the big deal? So on that, and then, of course, you have the tactics people use across the table that could be very different depending on cultures.
Right. So how do you look at these different countries? Do you have like a chart that says, okay, if you're in Colombia, it's going to be this much more time? Is there some guide somewhere that tells you these things?
For legal purposes, there are certain guidelines that you have in certain countries where you get to know, the people, and you realize the word reasonable in the United States has a significant meaning, and it does not have the same meaning in Latin America, words like that. So there are certain cues that you have all of a sudden that you can develop on the legal side. And
also, it's not only on the legal side, it's the most effective global organization doing negotiation across borders are usually the ones that are able to use knowledge, local knowledge, people who have already done negotiation. The worst thing you can do if you want to start a new contract is to go totally dry and not having done your due diligence to know anything about the culture, not having made contacts locally, so you understand actually who you're going to talk to, how they make their decision making. So there's a lot of work that has to be done up front before you even come to the table.
All right, let's play devil's advocate a little bit. In a legal sense, if there is a dispute, is it the cultural impact on the society where the laws are made that play into the battle? Is it, if you, let's say, if you're in Colombia and you're trying to fight the battle in Colombia, you have to go along with the cultural norm there. You can't stick with just straight up legal language.
Well, let me jump in right there. We're talking about conflicts of law issues as well, and private international law. There's a whole bunch of different things, and you can actually structure that within the contract as to what laws will apply, where the dispute will take place, and what form we're going to use. So those things can all be negotiated and actually set forth so you don't have a difficult situation at the end.
That's got to be frustrating when you're dealing, coming from America, dealing with laws and the way things are done, and going to a place where they say, well, yes, we do this too, but only on every other Tuesday. And you have to follow that line, and it's got to be frustrating.
And but that's why I know you have had a show on preparation from the lawyer's perspective. That's why also lawyers in negotiation are so useful for an organization, because one of the skills you acquire as a lawyer is the preparation. I think in business, we make a lot of assumptions sometimes that everybody has the same interest, which is to make money. And then we come down to some pretty amazing surprises because, it's more than money. There is the tangibles, which is the money, and the intangible, which is how do we get there.
So it seems like the legal language is susceptible to the same cultural influences as just the regular language.
Yes, you don't only need to speak the language, you need to understand the legalese.
Is the negotiations a behavioral type situation?
Yeah, the negotiation, if you're talking about the pure negotiation, which is when you have two parties facing each other trying to negotiate a contract, this is where the tactical part comes into play. Negotiation has two sections of it. One, there's the strategy, which is the preparation, making assumptions, covering your assumptions, preparing. But across the table, it's all about tactics. It's all about how are you going to influence the other side, what perceptions you want them to have about what your interests are, what your walkaway point is. So that's why you have people who are very good strategists in negotiation, who are extremely good at preparing for the negotiation. Then you have people who are amazingly tactical. Okay. And you want both people on your team, because you want to have that person on your team who is understand the local culture, understand the innuendo, the language, the nonverbal, and we could jump in at the last minute and say, I speak your language, I understand your culture. And so that becomes the behavioral part of the negotiation.
Right. And if you get everybody together in one room, you can really get this done quickly. And there's not a back and forth. If you have a lawyer involved, even better, because you've got all these issues fleshed out and you don't have to go back to the legal department.
So when you're dealing with two different countries and you're trying to hash out either an agreement of any kind, you want to have face-to-face, because doing it over fax or email, there's cultural influences that you might miss, and you might miss some cues that could cost you the entire deal.
Absolutely. And I'm going to say something to your listeners. Email is the worst mean of communication. I mean, when I look at my email
you
account,
emailed me about that.
Yeah,
I was
exactly.
angry, and I realized you didn't mean it in a mean way.
You see, exactly. So, what you realize, I remember when being excited 20 years ago when email started to be a mean of communication. Now I dread opening my email, and then I have a smartphone, and then I get bombarded with email. And there's two phases, which is the non-verbal negotiation, which is all by words, by the language people use. And then, think about how many times we get in trouble because we said, oh, that's not what I meant. And it's just like too late, the message is gone. So think about putting that in the context in a negotiation where the person receiving your message might have English as their second language, third language. And then you are adding this layer of complexity in the negotiation that is interesting for me.
And another point is the Babelfish. A lot of people will get on the computer on Google and use Babelfish. You actually put your contract in, and then you press a language, and it translates it.
Wow.
And that is so dangerous.
Yeah.
It doesn't have anything to do with what you actually want. So don't do that.
Wow, they're going to take my spleen? How did I agree to that?
You'd be surprised. People can be very creative.
When it comes to computers and when it comes to technology, I don't know, maybe this is a true statement or not, but it seems like at least in international business and law, perhaps a smartphone is a good way to get dumb really fast.
Well, yes. I mean, it's not the best mean of communication. That's why, it's nice to have all this technology that we're all using, but when it comes down to negotiating a contract, there is nothing that beats face-to-face. I mean, and companies, unfortunately, sometimes kind of shortcut that whole process by saying, well, we don't have the money, it's not what we're really interested in, so we're cutting your travel budget. And you realize it's worth spending $20,000 sending somebody for a week in Paris if your contract is worth, millions of dollars.
Right. That's a very important point, because a lot of times right now we're seeing with the economy, companies are looking at ways to cut the budget, and this is not a place that you want to be cutting.
Now, I've heard these guys talking a lot about a couple of initials, COI. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yes, it's a tool actually that was created 20 years ago by a company called the Management Company out of Princeton. And it's a tool that really looks at your communication preferences. There's a lot of cross-cultural tools on the market right now, but at Thunderbird...
What does COI stand for?
Oh, Cultural Orientation Indicator.
Okay,
sorry.
Now tell us more about it.
I'm sorry. And so we have been using that tool for 5-6 years. There are quite a lot of tools on the market, but what it does is gives you your own preferences in terms of communication style. It's very hard for us. We make assumptions about how we like to talk to people, how we like to behave, but having a tool that is able to be a mirror somehow is, I think, a very powerful experience. I mean, I've used that with a lot of executives, and usually people are like, oh, that explains some interesting challenges I have.
So understanding yourself can help you avoid some of your conflicts with others.
Absolutely. And that's to me one of the first things you should do when you start to negotiate is understand what are some of your buttons that you don't like to have pushed.
Right, gotcha.
Is there a few indicators that are most important within that chart that you need to focus on? Is there like 2 or 3 or 4 that one should really focus on? Yeah,
the one that is very obvious for all the listeners is, of course, the communication, which is how we talk to people. But if you look, I mean, for example, what we're doing right now, our communication, 30% of our communications comes through language. So 70% comes from the nonverbal. So the way we talk to people is absolutely critical. And there is from like the 1950s, people look at Edward T. Holt, for example, who came and did his research here in Arizona on the Navajo reservation, came up with this concept of high and low context communication, which was really the fact that sometimes some languages are very direct, to the point. And other languages, it's all between the lines, and
Right.
sometimes between the paragraphs and the line.
Right.
The context is so critical. So that's why the legal language becomes also a real central piece of the negotiation.
There is so much nuance in the way something is said. The way something that is said, you can say, "I love you," and be like, "Whoa, what is wrong with that guy?" But on print, it sounds wonderful. So
Exactly.
there is always that context of inflection, the way something's said, a look on somebody's face, the eyebrow, the way their body language is, and what certain things mean is pivotal to being able to communicate with them in business.
And absolutely. And earlier we were talking about the difference between collectivistic societies and individualistic societies. I mean, some contracts are signed because they are good for the community in general, or they are signed and the contract is owned by the company. Like, for example, in the U.S., you sign a contract, but you don't really sign it. I mean, the company, it's an agreement between your company and their company. You go to some other countries and actually, no, it's almost a personalized letter.
Oh.
So somebody who's going to take your job 2 years from now has the right and actually will renegotiate the contract because they say, this is not my name on that contract, and I just want to revisit it.
And in those other countries, if you go to these other countries as an American and you sign off on a contract in that country, does that make you possibly personally liable for what the company does, or are you still shielded from that?
I mean,
Well, it depends on the country.
Yeah.
The laws are different depending on the country, so you have to be careful with that as well.
Can we have a list of countries where I will not get into trouble?
I wanted to bring up another point too. When we're talking about the way things are drafted, I can say, "I love you, but you're a bad cook," and it's very different from "You're a bad cook, but I love you."
Why does she keep looking at me?
I don't know.
I'm a wonderful cook.
So it depends on what comes first. If the language is your second language, you may not be catching on to
Right.
what is actually being said.
And to go back to your point, actually asking us to give you a list of countries, I mean, it's not actually the list of countries is not as important also as almost the industry that
Yeah.
you are working with in these countries. Because some industries are much more relationship based, and other industries are just really kind of like transactional. So the contract is going to have a totally different value. So it's unfortunately, I wish there was like a quick list and tell listeners. I mean, these are the countries you have to pay attention to. But it's much more of a
Right.
study in details.
All right. Well, listen, we're going to take a break. When we come back, we're going to talk about making ethical business decisions in a global environment. This is Beyond the Curve, providing strategic insights on international business and international law. We'll be right back after this.